We should also review documentation. Documentation is critical for the operation and, of course, maintenance of our systems. So we'll look at things like, what is the strategic plan? When we're going to audit that, obviously, we're going to check to see if whether or not the IT strategic plan aligns then with the business's strategic plan. Is it such that IT has a vision that doesn't align with where the business is trying to go? We'll take a look then at the IT budget, and is that IT budget adequate, though we usually say it'll never be enough. But we take a look at then the IT budget and see, is that budget then being used effectively? How is the investment being made into the right things? For example, we always see it as a risk when there's a heavy amount of the budget that's going into equipment and technology and not enough into the training of the staff to use that equipment and technology. We need to review the security policies of the organization. Are those policies reflective of law, culture, and certainly best practices today? The idea of a policy is it tells people what they can or cannot do. And if I haven't told people, well, I can't expect them to necessarily abide by the behaviors that I want. We should have clear policies on things like acceptable use of the internet, clear policies on remote access, on bring your own device. And yet we see in many companies that the policies are years out of date. Nobody has written policies dealing with new emerging technologies. And yet we need to have those so that the people within the organization already know, yes, if you're going to bring your own device in, what are the conditions of that? And that's something we should be developing, those policies, as early as we can in then the adoption of these technologies. As an auditor, we should check, is the IT department leading the business, or is it always trailing months or even years behind? That could be a symptom of, should we say, poor operational management. We'll take a look at the org charts. How is the department organized? Do we have clear leadership? Do we have separation, perhaps, between development and production? Do we have teams that are properly staffed to be able to manage the various parts of IT, so that all of the areas certainly have that core people that can support that part of the operation? And part of this, of course, is taking a look at job descriptions. Job descriptions where everybody knows what their responsibilities are. We can say that in the job descriptions, that allows people to know what we expect of them. In the job description, we set out, should I say, the standards and the goals to which we expect them to attain. And yet, if we don't tell them what's expected, we could be confused when they don't seem to do the things we thought they would do. We review project plans. We kind of talked about the project-related risk a few moments ago. But we take a look at the project plans, and are those project plans realistic? Are the timelines even feasible? Is the budget adequate? Has this project plan been put together in a way to encourage the success of the project, or quite simply was the project plan written in a way to get approval, even though we knew that the project itself, as documented, didn't stand a chance of really delivering according to the budget and timelines it was given? This is always a risk in IT, where sometimes the project plans are overly optimistic. And maybe that's partially because it's easier to get approval for it and then try to get more money later. But no, as auditors, we should make sure that the project plans are as accurate and honest as they can be, so the decision of whether or not to approve a project is actually based on solid factual data. And we review the operational procedures. As an auditor, we look at the procedures because in many cases, what do we find? We have operational procedures documentation, but that's not what anybody does. We want to check and make sure that the operational procedures are the way it's done. I'm not saying that the documentation should drive how it's done, but certainly the documentation should be writing down how it is really done, not some theoretical operational procedure that certainly nobody even follows. So as an auditor, we check, are we following the procedures documents that are there? And if not, what do we change? The way we do it, or do we change then the documentation? We also take a look at our commitments when it comes to contracting. In this, of course, we'll look at the contracts we have in place to make sure we're meeting the service levels we've provided to others, and to make sure that others are providing the service levels that we have contracted for as well. That the terms in the contract are being met when it comes to support, delivery, maintenance, and all those areas, so we find out whether or not the contract, certainly the relationship between the two parties, is healthy. We want to make sure that all contracts today include security, the requirement to protect information, the ability to audit or review to make sure that the parties are living up to then the commitments they've made, especially in relation to personally identifiable information and privacy law in the contracts that we have. We want to review also the contract bidding and selection process. Are we truly choosing from the best vendor? Or are we choosing sometimes the vendor who has the best relationship with the person who awards the contracts? We have to make sure that the contract awarding process is in the best interests of our organization, not in the best interests of a few individuals, or perhaps something that is not done with that long sight of how will we have the support we need from various vendors of acquisition and support. We then make sure that the contract is maintained. Are we living up to the terms? When it comes to near the end of that contract, do we understand what changes have to be made so that contract is still relevant? Do we need more licenses or fewer? Do we need more bandwidth, or do we have services in the contract that are no longer required? Can we work on then the contract price? And these are things that very often will be gathered through then documenting whether or not there is proper compliance with that contract all the way through its existing life. We monitor the contract, make sure that certainly trouble is referred to a service provider, that they do respond within the time periods that they had contracted to, and make sure that there is that open communication about any contract-related issues.